Okay, today we're going to cover the blurs in Procreate. There are three types of blurs in Procreate. If you go to the little magic wand in the top left, go to that menu, you'll see there's a Gaussian blur, motion blur, and a perspective blur. And if you tap each one, and this is for any of the effects in this menu, you get the option of layer or pencil. Pencil lets you draw an effect on and be very specific where you want it to go. Layer will apply just to the layer that you're selected on. Pencil also has to be on a specific layer. But this also works for noise, sharpen, but it works for any of the blurs also. Now if you're using a Procreate version older than 5x, you won't have the layer and pencil option. It'll only default to apply to the layer that you're on. So let's look at Gaussian Blur first. For each of these demos, I'm just going to do the layer of application. So for any of the blurs, you basically drag your finger across the screen. So I'm going to drag my finger across the screen, and you can see the Gaussian blur is basically a generic kind of blur. It just blurs the image, and I can go even further, and the further I go, my original image just disappears, and I can even blur the color almost out of existence. I can go back and reduce the blur, and I can go forward. So that's Gaussian blur. Motion blur will blur in the direction that you're dragging. So if I drag to the right, the blur goes right to left. If I drag up and down, the blur goes up and down. And I can even blur on a diagonal. Finally, there's perspective blur, and perspective blur has two options, and they work off the concept of a vanishing point. So if I move this vanishing point, or this dot that appeared on my screen, the blur will go towards that dot. And you can see on the edge of the dolphin, the lines kind of go and meet at that dot. Basically, if you know what one-point perspective is, that's what's being applied to this blur. And wherever I put that dot, I can move it around. You can see the blur is changing as I move the dot. Then there's directional. Directional works a little differently. So I'm going to drag my blur up to the percent, and then this little arrow on that circle. If I drag that around, you can see how it changes the blur. And also when I move the point or dot around, the blur changes. Still the same concept, but it's a different type of a blur. Now all of these blurs can be used for different effects. If you want to blur an image, if you want to put a glow behind an image, which I did in an earlier video, you can check that out. It can also just be used for making maybe action. If you have someone running and you want to use a motion blur to look like there's a blur behind them. Blurs can do a lot of different things for your images. Have fun with them, and I'll see you next time.